Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Listening to podcasts is something that I incorporated a couple years ago. I think during COVID most of the time. Before my teenage years, I didn't really discover or understand the whole point of listening to podcasts. And also I just didn't have people that I liked that kind of made me want to listen to podcasts. It was something weird that I saw people do, but then finally during COVID, I was just so curious, and obviously during COVID it was a lockdown and there wasn't many things to do outside of my house, so I just kind of stumbled into podcasts. The first podcast that I listened to was Freakonomics, and I was a newly student for economics. I kind of wanted to learn more about the subject, so I relied on podcasts, and I discovered Freakonomics. I listened to so much. I listened to a lot of episodes, and that really got me into podcasts. And surely, but later, I discovered more, and then I really fell into people like Tim Ferriss. Then I fell into Dave Asprey for biohacking. That kind of got me really into health. And then I stumbled into Huberman Lab, which got really famous at that time, in 2021. And then I fell into other scientific podcasts. Anyhow, in this video, I wanted to share with you my favorite podcasts so far in my life, and I really hope that you'll discover something interesting. All right, first podcast, the Huberman Lab. This is a podcast for literally learning everything about science. Like he says in the podcast episodes, he says that he wants to make science available for the public, and it needs to be public information. So whatever your curiosity is about health, your eye health, your ears, your literally anything about your biology, you can learn from this episodes that he has in this podcast. You can learn from his podcast, and it's fascinating because it feels like I am gaining information that isn't standardized. It's just so free, and it just really pushes my curiosity, and I learned so much about my body. I learned so much about habits that I could use to learn faster, to sleep better, to eat healthier. So there's just so much things you can learn, and it's a fantastic podcast. Second is called The Lifespan. This is from David Sinclair, and it's kind of similar to the Huberman Lab, but he focuses more on lifespan, the things we can do to really increase our lifespan. I mean, obviously I'm not even in middle age. I shouldn't really be concerned, but trying to be as healthy as much as possible. And so learning at an early age, I think, is very important and insightful. So I was able to learn a lot about how to fast, which is something that was very abstract for me before, because I'm so used to eating breakfast, lunch, dinner. But that's what modern society tells us to do, that these three meals are so important. And after listening to a lot of episodes by him, and with backed scientific literature with a lot of empirical evidence, I was convinced that fasting is very important, and it was very beneficial in my life. So after listening to a lot of episodes by him, I was able to fast. I learned how to fast, and I've been doing it ever since. So it's been probably over a year. Over a duration, I don't really fast crazy for days, but I have been skipping breakfast. Sometimes I have been skipping lunch. If you want to check more about me fasting, I recommend you watch this video. I'll leave it up here about me. I think I was fasting for 7 weeks, and that was only dinner. So that was very interesting, and I probably share a lot of insights and how I was able to do it. And if you're curious about fasting, I recommend you check out this video. The podcast is called the Lex Friedman Podcast. This person is from, I think he's a professor in AI in MIT, but he talks a lot about AI, artificial intelligence, but he also digs deeper into kind of abstract spirituality questions, if you know what I mean. Because he is very, I think he's a very passionate person for life, and he's a very life-loving person. So he has a lot of interesting and abstract and diverse guests that comes in his show. So it just this, it gives you a plethora of options about how to become knowledgeable. And specifically for him, who has a very logical and a technological background, who is very intelligent in AI, gives you other it gives you insights and gives you questions of how this person that's very logical can have interactions with other people. There are like celebrities, there are maybe spiritual, there are just very different backgrounds. So when they both have conversations, there's other things that you don't expect to learn, but you will learn eventually. And so this podcast really brought me this, or taught me how interrelatable everything is, no matter how diverse they are. Another podcast is called The Quick Brain by Jim Quick. This was one of the first podcasts, I think, after Freakonomics that I listened to, and I learned so much about how to generally have a healthier brain. So in terms of like brain foods, or how to learn faster, how to memorize faster, how to sleep better, which is so important for your brain. A couple of weeks ago, I was in this, like, our class for my previous semester. We were taking this course called The Science of Learning. And in the one of the last lessons that we learned was about the relation between sleep and memory. And what was very insightful was that as we age, we're more prone to have dementia, which is like loss of memory, right? But we also have this problem of not being able to sleep longer hours. And it's kind of insightful that the older we get, the less memory we have, but also the less sleep we get, because we suck at remembering things the older we get, and we also suck at sleeping. And so it's so important for us in our young age to try to get enough sleep for remembering better, and which is very hard to accept because everyone pretty much in my generation has either sleep restriction or either sleep deprivation, and these both things are considered lazy. Very insightful podcast. I recommend you check it out if you're very curious about neurology and brain. Another podcast is by Carl Newport called The Deep Questions. I haven't read his book, but I read like a lot of summaries, which is called Deep Work, and that was like one of the book that got him very famous. Anyhow, he's a very interesting person when it comes to focus, when it comes to doing uninterrupted work. And this concept called deep work is generally just for anyone who is trying to gain like happiness from his tasks and not be distracted. Obviously, in the modern time, we have a lot of distractions like social media. We're more used to or prone to doing multitasking instead of monotasking. We have like all these apps open when we're trying to focus in one task, and we struggle to focus for even 15 minutes. So he really breaks through the conventional problem that we have and makes you as the reader question things that makes you uncomfortable in a way. So anyway, in this podcast, he has a lot of guests that they talk about obviously the title is called Deep Questions. So with his knowledge about how to be very focused, how to be uninterrupted person, and what are the habits or tactics that you should use, or you can even say hacks that you could use to be uninterrupted. Usually, in general, most people are most focused in the morning, so he even talks about prioritizing how to like get that morning hours very efficient with doing the most important tasks for the day. That was more of like this information is more of in his book, The Deep Work. But in the podcast, he shares other things that are not in the book. You learn a lot about focus, you learn a lot about being this uninterrupted person, you learn a lot about just like generally feeling happy with the work that you produce in the world. And as a student, I learned a lot about how to focus better, faster, and longer by listening to his podcast and reading his books. Another podcast is called On Purpose by Jay Shetty. This was like one of the early podcasts also, I think. It was like in 2020, so it was during COVID, and I listened to a lot of his podcasts. You'll learn a lot about health. I think it's the number one health podcast in the world. So yeah, he interviews a lot of interesting guests. This guy, Jay Shetty, I think he was from England, but he chose to become a monk in India, which is a very big decision and a scary one. But he pursued that route and he was able to come back. I don't think he's a monk anymore because he has a wife now. But anyways, you learn a lot about health and how to he has this famous concept called the monkey brain, which is obviously like us, like our brain just constantly being interrupted, distracted, kind of similar to what Cal Newport says a lot about in his book, but he doesn't call it the monkey brain. In general, like sort of similar to um, Lifespan and Huberman Lab, about knowing about your biology and the good habits, the bad habits. One thing that this podcast stands out from others is he talks more about relationships and how to get healthy, good relationships. Kind of spiritual, kind of woo sometimes, but it was insightful because I come from a similar background as well, just because I'm from the East and I'm a Buddhist, and I kind of like to know more about spirituality in this world of just logic, right? So it was interesting. Another podcast is one of my favorites. I was binge listening to this because it's like a episode series type of a podcast. It's called The Prince, hosted by The Economist, and I loved this podcast because I learned so much about China. Obviously, I think I think everyone should learn more about China, just because it's a powerhouse, it's a manufacturing powerhouse country. I'm an economics student, so I really like to learn anything about economics, and so I was able to learn so much about this economy that was kind of recently very poor in general. Like, I think over 50 years ago it was extremely poor, and all of a sudden it became the manufacturing powerhouse, and is, if not as big as America, it is second largest. So it's insane, and you learn a lot about this person named Xi Jinping, who is the president. You learn a lot about economics, you learn a lot about history, and you learn a lot about China and how it became so powerful and what it takes to be the president of that country. So it's very interesting. All right, lastly is the Tim Ferriss podcast. I loved it. I learned so much about health, about meaningfulness, about like life meaningfulness, just how to bring more life enjoy in your life and how to enjoy the process of life. Learned a lot about the diets, obviously, and then I learned a lot about the business, like how to think more about business, how to really prosper business in this modern world. And I learned this concept, which is very insightful. It's called the outsourcing concept, and this is from the podcast that I listened to, one of his episodes. And the whole thing is that as you make more money, you should prioritize actually spending it to outsource your work so you can free up more of your time, right? Because most of the time we don't have this trust, or we just like have this lack of knowledge of trusting others, or like we just want to do everything ourselves. And what we tend to neglect, what we tend to forget, is that everyone has 24 hours in a day, so we can't do everything, and you need to prioritize outsourcing so that you can free up more of your time for family, for even other work, or for relationships. So you just want to free up more time by outsourcing the unnecessary or unimportant tasks that are necessary, right? So that was very insightful. Another thing is, I think he's just generally very good at asking questions. He's kind of similar to Joe Rogan. So I really enjoy just listening to a lot of his podcasts because of obviously all the interesting guests that he has, but more in general, him as a person, because he's so curious about life. And I just like people that aren't in one field, you know what I mean? Like, they just can connect with all the other fields in the world, that no matter what, like one day he would interview this person that takes care of lines, another day he would interview this person that is like the genius in stock marketing, and another day he would interview this person who is genius in writing. So he just has this ability to connect with people all around the world with different skills. So very interesting, and he's a master in asking questions. And I also listen to it just to like learn how to ask better questions, because one of his things that he says, one of his quotes that I really liked, that resonated with me, is the like the most powerful thing when it comes to productivity, or just being this machine, or just being this person that's very successful, or like just very productive. The most powerful productive thing you can do is to ask better questions to people so that you can get better answers, right? So that was very interesting, and that's what I learned. You just need to prioritize and learn how to ask better questions. Anyhow, thank you guys for watching. I hope you liked the video. Definitely subscribe. hit the notification bell, and I'll be uploading more videos. So I'll see you guys next time. Peace.